Hello and welcome back to Unmasking the Trans Movement with John Euler. I'm your host, Brad Wilder. Today on the show, Uta Hagen is back and she's going to talk all about being a trans widow. There's a lot that happens to trans widows, from the emotional side of things, the physical side of things, and then the recovery. We're going to talk about it all today. John Euler is with us again. John, great to have you on the show today. Thank you very much for being here.
Brad, thank you. As I often say, we couldn't do it without you. Thank you for your expertise. And we are excited and grateful to have Uta Hagen back with us. If somebody, and I recommend somebody go back to the previous episode, Uta began to tell her story. Uta is what is called a trans widow, otherwise known as those who are left to pick up the pieces from men who became unfaithful. Men who disregarded their promises to love and cherish till death do us part. So these men are not owed our sympathies. These are the moral cowards that steep themselves in pornography and walk away. And even worse, expect their wives and kids to deal with it. So we are here to help feature Uta and her story, which is very characteristic of the stories of so many women. This is leaving bodies in the wake, so to speak, of this. There's no other way to put it. This is evil, and we're here to help support the survivors, the victims of this great travesty. Uta, welcome back. Thank you so much for being willing to set the record straight on behalf of the genuine victims of this. We have kids that are having their body parts removed from this heinous medical stuff. We've addressed that on Unmasking the Trans Movement. But the other group of survivors of all of this are the families, the wives and kids of these deviant men. So thank you for being back. Welcome again. And I want people to get to know you and your work and let them know how they can get a hold of you and some of your written work, your books.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you, John and Brad. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the understanding that you've expressed for us ex-wives of men who, as I say, 24/7 cross-dress. My story starts about 30 years ago, and I'm just going to relay one way in which trans widows are haunted even 30 years on by their ex-husbands. I'm just going to briefly say that I don't use female language for any of the ex-husbands. I believe in biological reality. My ex-husband is the father of my children, and I might be the only person in the world now who has dreams where he comes back in his male persona, the one that I married. And just recently I had two dreams. One involved him. They're both brief. And then the other...
Uta, if I might, to set the stage for what people are going to hear,
yes.
Can you share the book?
Oh, yes.
Chronicles your journey.
Yes.
Because it's so important for people to be able to read your story. It's a beautiful book.
Thank you. I wrote a book called In the Curated Woods, True Tales from a Grass Widow, illustrated with 50 of my own nature photographs, which show how I've been using gardening and working in my small 2.5 acre woods to restore wildflowers. And this is part of a program of healing, which I have really been following a path to help myself to get over the PTSD, the post-traumatic stress disorder, which started very shortly after I discovered what he was doing. And just to illustrate how some of this trauma lives with you, I will just quickly tell you two of my recent dreams. in the first dream, it was Neddy, Neddy. That's my pen name for Neddy in my writing. He suddenly, his face was in front of me, and his eyes, unblinking, were just staring at me. And I said to him, "Why are you staring at me?" And that's the whole dream. And I woke up at 3 a.m, kind of in a cold sweat. And what this is a result of is the feeling that my marriage was different from other people's, in that he was observing me for the purpose of co-opting the way I talk, the way I move. He was believing that he could get inside of my head. He made a reference to that once. And then the other dream was about his...
Uda, if I could step in just for a moment, because what you just said is the perfect description of a white-collar psychopath. According to Dr. Robert Hare, and I've studied psychopaths up close and personal, because a psychopath, which in my estimation, how one becomes that way, nurture, nature, genetics, all play a part, but the primary issue is the overriding of conscience. And you layer that with deviant sexuality, and thus you have the makings of a sexual psychopath. Psychopaths have no conscience, therefore they have no empathy or no remorse. And so when you look at scans of psychopaths, there's not a lot of activity where there should be in the frontal area of the brain, where somebody who has empathy, who has remorse, would have activity. But there's a lot of activity in the occipital region in the back of the brain. That's where analysis takes place. So what they have deduced from the scans is that a psychopath will study their intended victims. Now, victims could be bloody victims, like we all think of, or it could be financial victims, whoever they're going to work. So the fact that he even disclosed to you, and as he was staring at you, they're masters of what's called impression management. So he was taking cues from you in order to work you and others. So he was having to scan you, as it were, try to read your mind in order to ultimately have a repository of information within himself to manage the impression of people so that he could continue to do what he was doing, which is working people and manipulating them.
Yes, yes. And then the other dream was just this image, also just a few seconds. It had to do with his father, who was a very angry person, who was difficult to get along with, and it was just hazy. My recollection of this dream was that his father was like following us around somewhere in a place that was maybe a new home or something, and he was unplugging all of the electrical objects and saying, "You're going to put up the electric bill. No, you can't have this and you can't have this." And that was the whole dream. And so I'm, it says to me that I'm my mind somewhere in my unconscious, I'm still processing out the way I was manipulated, and the feelings that I have about, this family that I married into.
The family that I moved into, if you could pick it up from there, 3, 2, and 1.
And so the family that I married into in the 1970s was, the college boyfriend that I got to know, who kind of was seeking me when I started college in my first freshman semester. We met at a folk dancing, social dancing group, and then 3 years later got married. I was 21, he was 23. I was pursuing modern dance as a career. I was doing the Bachelor in Fine Arts in modern dance, and after I quit from some injuries, I'm a regular civilian physically, but I can't really jump anymore. I said to him, I want to have kids, and I'll convert to your family religion, Judaism. And so I studied and I did that. And then we had our first child when I was just over 30. And it was after the second child was born that, looking back, I believe that he was really actively cross-dressing, maybe even during that second pregnancy. And in 1992, when our sons were 1 and 4, I was still nursing the little one. He came back from a trip to San Francisco that was ostensibly a business trip for the academic organization he was working for. And we lived in New York City, but I had come out to Chicago to his parents' apartment in a high-rise there by Lincoln Park in Chicago. And he flew back from this trip in San Francisco, coming back from San Francisco. And I realized right away when I saw him that he had shaved off all the hair on his arms and legs. And he later on, I saw when he took off his shirt to put on pajamas, he had shaved off his chest. And oddly, his parents weren't, mentioning that, or they were pretending that they didn't notice or something. And I tried to get him alone somewhere. There we are in this 2-bedroom apartment in a high rise, and he won't tell me. We've been married for almost 5 years or how long had we been married? We've been married for over a decade by then, and 12 years, I guess it was. He just was acting evasive. He said, "It's my business. What I do with my body is my business. Why would you have an opinion about?"
You're only the spouse. I mean, what business is it of yours?
Right.
Hello.
Yes, and also the thing is, I always liked his male smell. He had what I would describe as a sweet male smell. And I know that my younger son had a little bit of that. And the thing is, those, that's on your hair. It changed other perceptions of mine, of my husband, because he had shaved off his hair on his body. And during the 2 days that we were in Chicago, I could not get him to make any kind of rational answer. And of course, when your spouse is doing something very different like this, then you start thinking back. Well, let's see, how often has he been away from home? And maybe the reasons he gave don't make sense now. You're going into the last 6 months or so and saying, okay, what did I not notice? What's going on? And we got to this point where we were packing to head up to Madison, Wisconsin, where I'm from, for a family wedding. And I had the chance to just feel around in his suitcase because he and his mother and our children were out at the park while I finished packing. And before leaving, he said, "Oh, Uta, don't worry about my suitcase. My packing is all done, and there's no room in there for anything." And since we had traveled with our children before and we packed, all together, and you know how it is with little kids, and you grab something that didn't get packed and stick it in here and there, and we're all just sharing space in our luggage, right? And so I thought, okay, this is a meaningful indication of some kind to me. And the phrase Pandora's box came into my mind. And so furtively, while my father-in-law, was in another room in the apartment, his home office, I did open that suitcase. And I found 3 sketchbooks, which Nettie had written in, very nice, fine line pen on watercolor paper. He had not stinted on quality for this a series of journals, and they were filled with his unique, very distinctive printing. And I took them over to the dining room there, quietly opened them, each of them, to several different pages, found his anecdotes about how he was dressing up like a woman. He has to admit to himself that he is a transsexual, and he's been going out to the bars on 8th Street in Greenwich Village, Manhattan, to have his so-called true life test and see if men are looking at him and convinced that he can pass as female, because I guess he was wearing a wig and wearing dresses and makeup, and he had been, I noticed, growing his fingernails long. So I'm on a very tight time frame. I know they're going to come back in a half hour, and I'm in shock. There are very resentful phrases about me. He sometimes finds the children very annoying. I sort of, in these words, in this unexpected set of books, I saw my marriage, my family, and my whole adult life kind of shattering into tiny pieces. And I never have been suicidal, but I had this image of myself somehow through this, in the moment of the trauma, I somehow had this image in my mind of my body falling from this window on the 37th floor. I felt like everything in my life has changed in just a few minutes. Everything my husband has been saying seems a lie. And I went to a neighbor that I thought might be sympathetic. I wanted her to be willing to mail me one of the books to, like, my sister's address so that I could keep it. I was in this state for the next 15 minutes or so of a kind of panic in the shock. And I thought, well, I think I'm going to have to get divorced. I think I need proof that he's been saying these things about me. I don't know quite how to do this. At the time, people didn't have copy machines in their printers at home. And so the neighbor wasn't going to help me. She said, I can't help you, but here's a glass of water. And then I went back and I just put them back where they were into the suitcase, and tried to pull myself together to then get on the transportation to go up and attend the wedding in my family. And that
I want our viewers, our listeners, because I can feel in your voice you're reliving this, right? That's what PTSD does.
Yes.
Okay. PTSD, there's an excellent book called The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Okay.
Yes.
So I want people to understand, here's this wife. She has 2 kids, so a mother, and the husband has just returned from a business trip. You're at your in-laws, 2-bedroom apartment. Your husband and his mother and the kids, they're out. You've got the father-in-law, I think, was back, as you said. So you're in the small apartment. You open his suitcase. This would be the equivalent, but it's far worse. The wife opens the suitcase to find a pair of woman's panties and lipstick on the guy's collar, meaning clearly unfaithful. You've just seen this guy's been having an affair. Okay, you know he's coming back in a few minutes. He's having an affair. The man you thought you knew, and then you find this book that describes that he's not just having affairs. He multiple things going on. So in a split second of time, but it's far worse because now it's like, oh my gosh, he's going out with men. So in a split second of time, your entire world crumbles, and you know they're coming back, and you're supposed to, and you try to get some help, at least hold on to these books. I'm going to need proof, meaning in a split second of time, and people need to appreciate that. Those wives that have been there as far as infidelity, but this is far worse because the person that you thought you knew You don't know him, therefore you don't know what he's capable of. He told you hands off his stuff. So, and what you find is very disparaging stuff about you and the kids. So in a moment of time, you open this suitcase, you find this, and your entire world comes crumbling down, and in a few minutes he's coming back. And what are you supposed to do? Because you're still on a trip with him.
Yes, I know. What I'll say is I had
It's an out-of-body experience.
Yes, I immediately had trouble eating. And so this is a classic woman thing. I looked really good in that dress I wore to that wedding because I was like suddenly lost a few pounds,
You have no appetite. You can't even think about eating.
Yes. And I what was I going to say? I used to think back to this. I used to think back and say, why didn't I rip a page out of the book? I need proof. I believe actually he destroyed it later, but I felt that I needed this to show if I was in court or something, how he's saying these terrible things about both me and the children. Now, the other thought that kind of made my heart stop is I was still nursing our 1-year-old. And I said to myself, well, we just lived through the 80s and the AIDS crisis. And now I have no idea what my husband has been doing. And I'm nursing our 1-year-old. Now, of course, he was eating. I nursed both of my children until they were 2, but they start eating, at 6 or 8 months. And so the nursing was just, the comfort thing. And it was slowly, he was getting weaned. But I said to myself, I don't know. What if I could have been exposed to AIDS? And what if I could be transferring it to my child? I mean, I am getting emotional. I'm getting more emotional this time. And I couldn't believe that my husband, who claimed to be somewhat Jewishly religious, and we went to synagogue services together, that he wouldn't be thinking about the risk that he might be causing his whole family, right, by doing this. Now, not only was there risks in whatever kind of affairs he might be having or sexual activities that were involved with the going out to bars. I mean, the thing is, in Greenwich Village, it's gay bars, and there's a lot of men walking around in the state of undress and things in the bathroom and things like this. That's just a known. It's known. It's a known detail. That's their context, their environment. And so if he was being seen by men over there in that neighborhood, it's likely these were all gay men. And
Uta, you're being very polite. What I will say is this, having worked with sexually deviant men, these are men that are very vile in terms of what they're into. Multiple partners. When they go into these gay bathhouses,
yes,
urinating on one another, defecating on it, we call them golden showers. We're not here to paint them in a sensitive light. These are sexually debauched men. So you suddenly find out, and what goes through your mind is, oh my gosh, he goes to San Francisco.
Yes.
Okay, we're not biased. The reality is San Francisco is the hub. You've got a few of them, Boston, Atlanta, Seattle, but San Francisco, right? That's where all the stuff emanates from. And so all you know is your husband comes back from San Francisco with this journal that's revealing this other life, that's now somebody you don't even know. And so your marriage is gone, and suddenly you're also faced with the very high likelihood that he's got an STD, if not AIDS, and been intimate with you, and now have you pass it along to your kids.
Yes, I mean, I don't technically know if this breast milk piece of it
But right now it's all swear as it was unfolding. These are all the things, very reasonable things that any woman,
yes,
any wife and mother,
right,
would experience.
And I started thinking, should I just wean him suddenly? Because he's 1 year old, he eats, he drinks milk, should I just wean him? But I thought, psychologically, I'm not ready for it. It just is this insertion of something very, very foreign into your life, something that was unexpected, sort of unfathomable to me, even though in the dance world I knew plenty of homosexual men. Some of them were my teachers. Some of them actually died of AIDS during the 1980s when I was dancing. It's not my world. I personally don't believe in promiscuity. So, and he was just also not treating me nicely. Nettie was all of a sudden very cold and defensive, and I felt like, okay, you came back a different person. But then, of course, I'm looking back into his behavior in the last 6 months when he started graduate school after our second child was born. I had been sick when our youngest was 6 months old, and he wouldn't drop a class from his graduate school MBA program. There are all these things in the past. When you're a trans widow, you look into the past and you say, oh, this, then number two, then, and there was this. And then the things kind of come back to you like dreams haunting you. And you feel like, just as with a woman who's found out that her husband is a bigamist and has another family, you suddenly feel like my last 12 years of my life is apparently a lie. And in the books were references to someone named Ruth that I have named in my memoir, Ruth the Charlatan. And Ruth was a groomer who took money, cash only, from specifically cross-dressing men who are exploring what category are they in? Are they a transvestite? Are they a transsexual? Are they, now it's all blurred. Who knows? But she was the wife of a doctor, and I believe she was funneling the people who were coming to see her to her doctor husband, to get the hormones or to get blood tests or goodness knows what. I do remember him referring to a blood test and saying that he was found to have low testosterone. And I sort of, it's almost like out of a Greek myth or something. I felt like I was, Eurydice in the underworld. I had been blindfolded. Suddenly I don't know my life. I have to think of my children. Of course, that is my priority, my children. And I'm trying not to present differently to my children. But of course, you can hear it in my voice. Of course, I'm feeling very shaky, right? And
Uta, the clock is our great nemesis. Yep. Would you be willing? We're going to stop right at this moment. It's a very rough place to stop. But time constraints. Mm-hmm. But what I am hoping people are taking away from this is, it is not these deviant sexual men that need our sympathies. It is the wives. It are the children. These are the true victims. These men have made choices. They've steeped themselves in deviant pornography, and they are masters of manipulation and, as you've described it, gaslighting, right? The wives, making them confused. And then you've just described a very important thing. We could say, follow the money. So he was seeing somebody, a female mental health person or a therapist, however she billed herself, but she's connected to a husband physician who's getting cash from this whole deal. So what we say is follow the deviants and follow the money, and you're going to understand what is behind ultimately those pushing the trans movement, and that's why we are here to unmask the trans movement on Unmasking the Trans Movement. Uda, stay with us, stay right there. Brad, we will be back for part 2.
Thanks, John. Thank you, Uda. We have another great show coming up in just a minute. Please stay right there. We are getting back to Uda Hagen on, well, her story and the issue that faces all trans widows. I'm Brad Wilder. This is Unmasking the Trans Movement with John Euler. I'll see you next time.